think now, I think it has to be the work first of business and of the member states, including the German government, which have basically encouraged the Commission to look at it. We had the failure of the TIA. Part of it was because there didn't seem to be any provincial buy-in. Other part is because there wasn't any market access components except for procurement. And I think that's may have been some of the reason why there is no provincial tie-in. Now we have a very comprehensive, at least when we look at the scoping paper, both of market access and non-market access issues, and I think this is what's provided the interest.
Just leads me immediately when you gave the kind of word. What is the interest of Germany actually when Germany played such a strong role in encouraging both sides and bringing other European governments on the table and pushing this forward? What's in for Germany, and why did they pick Canada?
I mean, first you have to see. I would like to come back also to Professor Woolcock's point. Canada wasn't on the radar in 2006. The TIA negotiations had broken down. There was, in a way, I would say, general apathy on both sides. 2 out of 3 summits had been cancelled at the end of 2006 under the Finnish presidency. I think 2005 was one. The Canadian government wanted deliverables. So when you are there as an embassy, you start to think, what can we do to enhance the relation? What common projects are possible? The new EU ambassador was before coming from South Korea, so he was very familiar with the free trade negotiations on Korea. So we talked to the Canadian government before, is something like that possible? And we found very soon a lot of interest on the Canadian side. And we told them from the beginning, what was mentioned before, the provinces have to be on board. That is a key demand from us, and also this point of the geographic indicators. But also on our side, we had a lot of apathy. Let's say we had to interest Berlin, we had to interest Brussels. Also there was not a great enthusiasm on the sides. That we are now sitting here, and I personally, I think 95% we can have a launch of negotiations on May 6th, is also, for me, it's a good example on how at the beginning politics is quite important in such a case, because there was not a critical mass. There was the EU-Canada business community who was very interested. We, as Jason already talked, there was also at the end of 2006, we tried to make some moves. On our side, we tried to, the German embassy, the Canadian embassy in Berlin, the EU Commission, we were trying, to get this critical mass together, and in a way we succeeded. We told the Canadian side, you need to have the provinces on board, because you get access to 500 million consumers, and we get access to 30 million consumers. So there has to be something in for the European side, when I see now my point. And from the political side, I have to say the motivations you said as a model is quite important, but at least in our discussions, internal discussions, there was always also a point, this EU-Canada agreement, when this goes through, this can also, let's say, shine into the US, because we are in talks with the US, but they are not as much progressing. So this is it's not a general model, it's a clear model also for the North American continent. And the second motive, or another motive I would also add, is what you said at the beginning. It's new or strengthening transatlantic links. And this partnership agreement will strengthen the transatlantic links, because in the scoping exercise, there's not only these factors mentioned that we talked already about, but also labor mobility. I mean, Charest is also talking with the French side on more labor mobility. This is also not excluded on the longer term on our side. So this is also a clear political motive behind all the economic factors, where we are convinced that both sides win. And I think that this has been achieved in the last 2 years, shows when you when there's a political will and both sides are willing to do something, it's possible. But it wasn't easy at the beginning.
Let's talk, all three of you, about the 5%. You mentioned there's a high probability that 95% of the hurdles are out of the way and we can move forward. So there are 5% left over, let us say in quantitative terms. So maybe what's in terms of quality? What are the highest hurdles for the problems that we will have to tackle for coming forward with an agreement? All three of you, I don't know, like, only to give you one idea, but just the latest decision of the highest court is for Germany regarding GMO. An issue will be treated. The fact that, as mentioned by Steve, that financial services are so far not really very well included, at least in this COVID.
Well, they are included. I guess they are included. There isn't any. They're not excluded. They are included. I would say there may be more of a sensitivity on this side of the Atlantic on the area, on some areas of financial services, which may be why there's no specific reference to them. But the general line is that all services, no services are excluded. That means financial services. So their financial services are included. They're included in the joint study, and so that may be an issue when we start to negotiate, and particularly during this financial crisis. Some of the that Canada has been talking about its own financial system, which has held up very well. Before we got into this crisis, there were some criticisms from foreign countries and from the EU in terms of some of the restrictions on banking, for instance, for foreign banking, some of the restrictions on insurance, et cetera, et cetera. That's still there, but we're now in a different context. So we'll see where we go on this. But certainly that's an area of financial services area is a fairly important area at this time.
Other suggestions where you would see Jason and then Jörn?
I think the most immediate and most difficult issue is agriculture, and it's the production substitutes for agriculture. But I think actually the most difficult issue to resolve is how you treat non-tariff barriers that arise. The mechanism for actually dealing with that is going to be incredibly complicated to build, I think. But it depends on your definition of a trade agreement. I mean, as Professor Woolcock says, Article 24 of the GATT says basically to be called a free trade agreement, which we favor the title free trade agreement because we believe that that's more politically saleable. If you go to when we meet with ministers, they always say free trade agreement because they know that that's what gets picked up in the media and people understand, the general public and the business community. But if you're not a trade purist and you're willing to be flexible, you could carve agriculture out of the negotiations and conclude the agreement quite readily, we believe.
But
Jason, I would like, I mean, I'm again arguing from a political point of view. We went to the Canadian government and told them again, don't call it a free trade agreement. We know it's easier to sell, and everybody calls it a free trade agreement in discussions with our side all the time. But he said it's a bit more, but it's also a political point of view. I followed the discussion very close on the free trade agreement with EFTA in the Canadian Parliament, where a great majority passed it. But in a way, the Canadian left, the NDP, they voted against it, and we talked to NGOs and NDP members, and why are they voting against it? Because in their mind, free trade. This is not our perception. NAFTA has a bad odor in a way, taste, and besides that, ours is much further. And even when we speak to members of the Canadian left, 3 out of these 4 countries which are in EFTA are socialist run in Europe. So